In the previous video, we saw that acceleration of technological progress in Britain around the middle of the 18th century has allowed for a dramatic increase in labor productivity. In turn, this positive labor productivity shock kick-started what we now call modern economic growth. However, we left one question unanswered. What caused technological progress to occur in the first place? If you want a full answer to this question, you will have to wait until at least your second year, where we will discuss the so-called endogenous technological change. People have got Nobel Prizes for creating an explanation of this type of technological change. As those theories can be rather mathematically involving, we will leave them for the second year. For now, however, we need simpler, intuitive explanations of what prompted technological progress. What prompted technological progress was the great human drive to do the best you can in a system that rewards effort. A system which we now call capitalism. The key to understand capitalism is to understand that it really is a system. One of its elements alone could not have created the drive for better technologies without the other. So we have three key elements of this system. Private ownership of the production factors, that's capital and labor, which people are free to exchange. Once people are freely exchanging those factors of production, they get organized by entrepreneurs in firms, which scale up the effort for greater profits. Note that the system cannot work without freely functioning markets, which send signal to market participants about where to focus their efforts. The signal that participants receive is typically the price of certain goods. Once the system has set in and spread across a number of countries, we can begin talking about the capitalist revolution. The system has spread because it appears to be superior to other economic systems, for example, socialism. Superior means that over long periods of time, citizens living in the system keep voting for the system to remain in place, whereas citizens living in other parts of the world under different economic systems keep demanding economic and political change until they live under capitalism. Of course, this does not mean capitalism is faultless. What I'm saying is that historically, capitalism has generated more political and economic benefits for more people than any other existing economic system. So, we would like to know if capitalism is indeed as good as advertised. Does it really cause economic growth? So let me give you some examples. In 1936, a few years before East Germany was split from West Germany, the living standards in the two parts of Germany were approximately the same. Today, after more than 45 years of socialist experimentation in East Germany and after 30 years of economic transition back to capitalism, East Germany has not achieved the welfare it had relative to West Germany from 75 years ago. My other favorite example is Korea. Before the Korean War in 1956, Korea was one nation. It is still one nation under two vastly different economic systems. Socialism prevailed in the north, while capitalism won in the south. Before the war, North Korea was the more industrialized part of the country. But let's assume it was at par with South Korea. Today, South Korea is one of the richest countries in the world. In the north, they're still trying to wake up from the socialist dream they used to have 70 years ago. With few exceptions, any country that was toying with socialism had undermined its economic development for decades. And with a few exceptions, countries that embraced capitalism have started catching up with the nations we now consider developed. Take, for example, Japan and Spain. Both are catching up Germany, even though they were not always capitalist countries. Or look at the remarkable growth South Korea had enjoyed over the last 5 decades. Even though it started growing from a much lower base in the 1960s, today South Korea is by far the richest country in this group. When it took off, South Korea was 3 times poorer than Argentina. 60 years later, it managed to turn this around and is now 3 times richer. What I'm telling you here seems a bit biased in favor of capitalism. Does capitalism always work? Is it a recipe for permanent prosperity? No, it isn't. Capitalism has produced a number of defects, especially in economies without a long history of democracy. In young democracies, private property tends to be less secure than in older democracies. If private property is not secure, private agents don't have enough incentives to do the best they can. They know the fruits of their labor might be lost to a mafia tax. We, the economists, luckily understand well the impact of property rights on incentives and study their impact in disciplines such as institutional economics. Capitalism can produce defects and not generate the expected technological progress if markets are not competitive. For example, when mobile phones came into existence in the 1990s, there was typically a monopolist who held the license for connecting people over mobile phones, 1 provider per country. The prices for a minute on the phone with your girlfriend were mind-boggling. You really had to love her to call her. Today, you talk for free with most numbers within a country and for peanuts with the rest of the world. The reason is there is competition now. But if markets are not competitive, if government policies are directed at stifling competition, market forces will keep alive firms which don't necessarily deserve to live. Which brings me to my last point. Sometimes it's not the market that gives you the signal to do or not to engage in a certain market strategy. It is the government. In some countries, many business agents are very close to the government. Governments secure contracts to companies and prevent market forces from revealing the best and the brightest in doing that line of business. Of course, if you're on the receiving end of the contract, you become very rich pretty fast. Or you like it, and you even convince yourself that you even deserve it. But if you are a firm that wants to enter that business to compete with the politician's friends, you virtually have no chance. So in short, this is how capitalism can fail. It fails when private property is not secure, when markets are not competitive, and when firms survive not because they have a superior product or service, but because the government has served millions to their owners on a silver platter, because they were just well connected. That's when capitalism starts generating glitches, and if those glitches become widespread and systemic, voters may start demanding a systemic change. But this is bordering the nexus between economics and political science, a discipline which economists call political economy. Back in the strict domain of economics, it is time to conclude what economics is about. So, first, we learned that economics is about how we make the things around us, about how we produce and how we measure what we have produced. Second, economics is also about how we interact to be able to produce those things. Those interactions happen not only between individuals, but also between firms and individuals, and between governments and firms. All these interactions produce consequences for our natural environment. the environmental footprint we leave on our planet will improve or hamper the lives of our children in the future. This is why we're coming to the last point for today. Economics is inherently a study of a dynamic world, a world that moves over time. A lot of our models, a lot of our theories about the world are going to be static. This does not tell you that they're useless. They're just simplifying the interactions that may happen. Those interactions happen between firms, households, and governments, and all of them are living in the biosphere and the physical environment. Economics has, until fairly recently, ignored the impact of our economic activity on our environment. Well, that is about to change. The next video concludes what we have understood and what we have to remember about the economy this week.